Support for podcasts comes from Milwaukee School of Engineering Center for Professional Education, offering courses in AI machine learning, project management, and more. Program information at msoe.edu/CPE.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Today we'll learn how social media is being used as a tool to teach often overlooked moments of Black history in America. Then, in Capital Notes, we'll look at the quandary in Congress over funding the Department of Homeland Security.
Democrats are dead set against funding what they see as heavy-handed tactics. And Republicans aren't looking like they're going to give in to all the demands that Democrats have. So what's the path out of this?
Plus, we'll join a group of seniors for their monthly social club meetup.
Our lives are shorter when we're this age, so why not gamble and walk in the door and pray that somebody is going to be nice to you, and usually they are here, and you move on and you've got a whole new life.
All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. Once again, for Black History Month, Derek Mosley is sharing stories about Black people's presence in American history. He's been posting the historical excerpts during the month of February for over a decade. Mosley is the director of the law school's Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education. He joins WUWM's race and ethnicity reporter Taryn Powell to talk about his approach to sharing often overlooked history during Black History Month.
So my mom, her siblings all went to high school in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so when I was growing up, my mom had told me about the Tulsa race massacre. And I remember I was like in fifth grade, and my mom said, "Hey, are you learning about the Tulsa race massacre?" So I went and asked the teacher, said, "Hey, are we going to learn about Tulsa and the race massacre?" And my teacher said it never happened. So I remember going home and talking to my mom. And I told my mom, "Hey, the teacher says it never happened." And she blew up. And so the next day at school, she's dragging me. Where is she? Point her out. Is that her right there? And then she had to have this conversation with the teacher. And from that moment on, she made it her mission to make sure I knew everything. And I have made it my mission to make sure my children know everything. And now with social media, it's given me the ability to have it go out all over the place. I had one story about the 6 888s I did maybe 3 years ago before anybody knew who they were. And that story has like been shared 140,000 times. And so social media is allowing me to reach people with these stories that I never would have reached just doing a lecture series, here and there. And, I have so many stories because once you start on this journey, you realize that, first of all, we were taught nothing. And when I was in school, I learned about Martin Luther King, I learned about Rosa Parks, and I learned about Frederick Douglass. That was it. Didn't learn about Malcolm X because he was a little too radical. And it wasn't until I started reading the autobiography of Malcolm X and listening to his speeches that I realized he really wasn't that radical. But it had been drained into us that he was too radical. So even when the stories were always out there, but they were a lot easier to hide when you had to try to find them in libraries of the Dewey Decimal System, right? Mm-hmm. But now a Google search could take you anywhere. And now the archives, the U.S. archives are open to the public. So you could do that as well. And so there's so many rich stories, and they're important to tell.
What does your research look like?
Yeah, so it's myself and my sister together. We do the same thing. She also does. She's still back in Chicago, and she does her same thing I do, 28 facts. And so we interchange stories. We do our own independent research, and then we exchange stories so that we can cover the gamut of Black culture, right? And so it starts with Google searches. It starts with buying books. I was just down in Chicago at the Newberry Library trying to buy books, Black history. That's where I get a lot of my information from. The books are there. Fortunately for us, we have some amazing Black historians who have put all these into books that we can access either virtually or buy them, at the library. And so it's made it a lot easier than it was when I first started. When I first started, it was literally go into the library and say, "Where's your Black history section?" Well, we don't have a Black history section. All right, well, give me a book about anybody Black, and then I'll go from there.
How do you choose what you're going to talk about?
Yeah, so there's no chronological order to it, really. I just take all these stories that I've amassed over a decade, and I just decide these are the 28 I'm going to feature today, and those are the 28 I'm going to feature next year. This never stops. And stories tend to it's sort of like a river. It has all these little tributaries, and they go in all different directions. History is intertwined. It connects, and because all of us are connected. And my favorite quote is by James Baldwin, and he said, "The past is not the past; it's the present in everything that we do today," which is so true. Things that happened in the past is the reason why things are the way they are now. And so if we don't learn that, we will continue to make those same foolish mistakes.
I know you talked about your mom really making it a priority to make sure you knew history, and now you do that for your children. Did you foresee yourself kind of taking on this mantle of sharing history with the community in this way?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, when I first started doing it, I just thought I was going to throw it on Facebook, and it was just something I throw out that my Facebook friends would see, right? And that was it. But then one friend saw it and shared it. Then another friend saw it and shared it. And then it just started to multiply to the point where I had reached my limit of Facebook friends, within the first, you only allowed 5,000 on Facebook, and that was gone in a year because people were like, "I want to follow you. I want to." I was taking friend requests from people, and then that got full, and now people were following, and I love it because people want to hear these stories. And now Instagram opened up a new realm too. You're hitting a younger generation, because the Facebook group is mostly older generation of people, but they didn't learn it either. And so a lot of them are like, "What? I never knew that story. That's hard to believe." And the one that surprises a lot of people is anything around World War II. Because when you watch movies of World War II when you were growing up, there were never any Black people in it. And so I went the most of my young life, watching these movies thinking, Black people didn't do anything in World War II, right? We didn't tell those stories. A classic example is everybody knows Rosie the Riveter, right? You've seen the picture, We Can Do It. And every time you see it, it's always a white woman. And then when you saw the pictures of her of Life magazine of these Rosies, they were all white women. But there were over 400,000 Black Rosies, 400,000 that we have sort of erased from history. And finally, now we're starting to understand all those stories that all of us have contributed to what this country is all about.
People probably have an idea of the consequence of not hearing these stories, but I want to hear what your perspective is when you don't tell all these stories of Black people's presence, for example, in World War II. What are the consequences of leaving those stories, those people, those perspectives out of history?
Yeah, other than the fact that that you miss the total comprehensive lecture of history of the United States. Besides that, it helps you understand why some things are the way they are, right? So when you drive in a car and you go to the suburbs, and while you're in the suburbs and you look around and you see, why is the suburbs 95% white? Why is that? But if we tell the stories that the vast majority of people who made it into the middle class, especially men, was because of the GI Bill. So they served their country, and then they got the GI Bill. They got low interest loans. They got free college. They got free loans for houses, free farms to try to farm to make them, this was our thank you from the country. But what we don't tell is that 1 million Black soldiers were denied the GI Bill, right? So this vehicle, which took whites into the middle class, was completely taken away from blacks who served in that same war, right? Put their lives on the line. And so when you think of that and say, well, if the GI Bill took my grandfather and got him to the middle class where he got this house, and this house was then passed on to my parents, and then you have this generational wealth that keeps going, and then you look on another side of town, and you're like, well, everybody here rents. Why are they all renting? And I don't understand how this is happening. Well, when we tell those stories, and I'm not even getting to redlining when we actually just said, we're not going to build houses in these neighborhoods, right?
Right.
I'm not even getting to that. I'm talking about even before that. This vehicle, one thing that brought the country together was this world war. We're going to fight evil. We're going to do democracy. And everybody stepped up to do it. Men, women, all different races and cultures. And then the war is over, but we're not going to give our thank yous to these 1 million Black men and women who served valiantly, right? Served valiantly. We're not going to tell their stories. And so that helps you get a better perspective of why some things are the way they are, or why some groups haven't succeeded as well as other groups. And so that's why we tell these stories. When we don't tell these stories, then people think that the history they learn is the full comprehensive history of America. And then they say things like, well, why do we have a Black History Month? We don't have a White History Month, right? You only hear that when you don't know the story, right? The educated person who knows that story would never, ever say that. And then not to mention the fact, Taryn, that history helps us to not repeat the past. When we know our history, we know the mistakes we made in the past, and we don't repeat them. And so when you hear stories of how people's constitutional rights were trampled or their human rights were trampled, we don't want to duplicate that. But if we don't tell that story, we never heard that it ever happened, then everything seems like it's happening for the first time, when in fact, we've gone down this road before.
Absolutely. That necessary context is missing.
Yes.
So tell me what you think about this. We're witnessing folks in power attempt to erase Black history, really any marginalized group's history, but particularly under this current administration. Do you think there will be more spaces popping up where Black people will be taking control of passing down that history in the community and in neighborhoods because the schools won't?
It's happening now. I mean, I could probably, you could go on TikTok, you can go on Instagram, you can go on any form of social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, and there are people just like me and my sister who are telling these stories every single day, not just during Black History Month, every single day. And it's become the mission of all of us who are doing this work to get these stories out. And our reach is farther than we ever thought it could ever be. I get messages from people in other countries who were like, wow, I had no idea that was that story. That person who was in Slovenia would never know me at all if it wasn't for that story. And so we're bringing everything closer together. So they can say, I'm not going to teach this. We're going to ban those books, and we're not going to do this or that. But the message is already getting out. And it's getting out to younger and younger generations. There's a whole bunch of young people on TikTok who are able to tell these Black history stories within like 18 seconds. They'll tell you the whole story of somebody in 18 seconds. And it's amazing. And it's easy. You hear it. And then from there, you move on to the next. You're like, oh, well, let me find out more about this story. Remember, I'm not here to tell you the entire diaspora of Black history.
Right.
I'm here just to tell you little stories that you might say to yourself, I'd like to learn a little bit more about this person. And then you do research on it. And then you find something new. And then you share that information. And then it just keeps flowering and flowering. We live in a society now where it's going to be really hard to keep those stories hidden because we are so connected to the rest of the world.
Derek Mosley is the director of the Lou Barr Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education at Marquette University Law School. He spoke with WUWM race and ethnicity reporter Taryn Powell.
This is Capital Notes from Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross, editor of WizPolitics.com. Hi, J.R. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay, let's start with immigration. It's on many people's minds given President Trump's immigration crackdown and the resistance in places like Minneapolis. Last week, Democratic U.S. Representatives Gwen Moore and Mark Pocan both opposed a government funding package as they pushed for more guardrails to hold the Department of Homeland Security and ICE accountable. But Democrats didn't have enough votes to stop the funding package. All the Wisconsin GOP House members voted in favor of it, and President Trump signed it into law last week as well. What should we know there?
So there's still this kind of a negotiation going on about the portion of the federal budget that deals just with ICE, Homeland Security, those kind of agencies. There is a temporary extension, essentially, to keep it funded. They're trying to work out a deal to get something done for a more permanent funding structure. The issue is it's not clear how they get out of the situation there because Democrats are dead set against funding what they see are heavy-handed tactics. And Republicans aren't looking like they're going to give in to all the demands that Democrats have. So what's the path out of this? And the backdrop is Marquette University does national polls. There's one out this week looking at the top line numbers. Generally speaking, a majority of people surveyed support removing people in this country who aren't here legally, even if they haven't done anything wrong. Now, if you ask the question a different way about, if they've been here for years and et cetera, haven't done anything wrong, change the numbers a little bit. But still, generally speaking, a straight up question, the American public wants those who aren't here legally to be removed. The issue is the tactics the Trump administration has been using, what we're seeing out of Minneapolis, and that has been roiling politics. You're seeing the president's numbers go down. You're seeing national polling that shows what's been a strength, immigration, turning into a bit of a weakness. Now, it depends on what social media platforms you're on and who you follow. We can get to a little bit of a bubble about what's going on, but it's definitely clear that the White House is trying to find a change in tactic, trying to turn things down because the two shootings in Minneapolis have really inflamed the public. The question really is, beyond the funding debate, which, we got a week and a half left, I think, or something like that, for they got to work out a deal. Politically, this is really firing up Democrats. It probably continues to impact things through the spring in Wisconsin. We have a Supreme Court race in April. But will it be that big of an issue come November, when there are midterm elections? I had someone point out to me that if you asked people a month ago about Minneapolis, the first thing they think about were Somali daycares, right? That was the big story out of Minneapolis, is alleged fraud. Now, you mentioned Minneapolis, and it's all about what ICE is doing in there and these protests and the shooting deaths, and it's just totally changed. Who knows what a month from now will be dominating the headlines, right? It's just, there's a constant churn out of this White House that makes it hard for the general public to keep up and honestly leaves people exhausted sometimes about all that's going on.
And the House vote on the funding came after the U.S. Senate last week approved those funding bills with a shorter-term funding extension for the Department of Homeland Security. In a turn of events that might seem strange to the casual observer, Wisconsin's Democratic U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin voted in favor of that package, while Wisconsin's Republican U.S. Senator Ron Johnson voted against it. What was going on there?
Ron Johnson's kind of doing a little bit of a protest vote, making clear he's not a fan of making changes or giving in to what Democrats want. So a little bit of that going on, a little messaging. Again, this thing was a temporary reprieve. The bigger question I'm looking for is when push comes to shove and it's more of a permanent funding solution, how are they going to vote and where's everybody going to end up in that U.S. Senate? That's going to be an interesting process to watch. And then if they can pass something in the Senate, what's the House do? Because the margin is very narrow for Republicans, and there's grumbling among some Republicans that President Trump is giving too much to Democrats, and they don't want to see him compromise as much as others do.
Has Republican candidate for Wisconsin Governor Tom Tiffany or any of the Democratic gubernatorial candidates weighed in on how they want Wisconsin to deal with ICE?
Well, Tom Tiffany has said if you're here illegally, you should be removed. Those who commit crimes should be removed. He said in various interviews that, he envisions ICE, if he's governor, ICE would work the way he believes it should, which is to cooperate with the agency and remove those who shouldn't be here. Democrats have had a different take on things. They have decried, and I'm seeing, there are 10 Democrats running for governor. I'm trying to kind of give overview of all 10 of them. So sorry for being a little bit general with these guys, but there are 10. But generally speaking, they've been unhappy with the tactics ICE has engaged in. You've seen them pushing back on what's going on and promising that if they were elected, they would not stand for these kinds of things if it was brought to Wisconsin.
This is Capital Notes. I'm Maayan Silver, speaking with J.R. Ross of WizPolitics.com. So meanwhile, U.S. Representative Scott Fitzgerald of Juneau said he was extremely disappointed that the funding package didn't include Republicans' SAVE Act. That's called by Republicans as the Make Elections Great Again Act, which would require proof of citizenship to register to vote. It's been sponsored by Wisconsin Congressman Brian Stile, whose district includes Kenosha, Racine, and parts of Milwaukee County. What is the SAVE Act in a nutshell, and what do you see as its political future?
It's a Republican proposal to try to require identification at the polls across states. Obviously, in Wisconsin, we have a voter ID law. It's been in place now for, 15 years, somewhere in that neck of the woods. Shortly after Scott Walker became governor, Republicans had full control. They pushed voter ID in Wisconsin, so we've kind of lived with it since then. This is be a nationwide requirement, but also a step further requiring proof of citizenship. Now, I'm not an expert in how you would do that, if you have to have your birth certificate or a passport to prove citizenship, like how that would be worked out. But there is a concern among some people that if you go from voter ID, which, let's be honest, look at polls, it's widely popular across the country. I think even like national polls show a majority of Democrats support it, for example, that beyond showing an ID, you would then require this citizenship proof. That could be problematic for some people. And how would that all work? Again, not an expert on that federal bill, but that is a concern that's been raised. For Democrats, they're, if you look at opinion polling, they know they're on the quote-unquote wrong end of this in terms of where the public is at. But part of their fear, my take is from my conversations, is if you give it on this, what else Republicans want next, right? You've seen Trump talk about nationally about Republicans should, quote unquote, take over voting in 15 places, that they should nationalize the elections. There's a deep fear that Donald Trump is setting up a scenario in which he would try to influence the election by inappropriate methods or try to step on the toes of the states, which are charged in the Constitution with setting time, place, and purpose. I believe is the phrase, with how elections are run. That's not how Trump wants it. He wants to kind of be in charge, and there's a fear that he would do something a little inappropriate to try and improve Republicans' chances this fall if he had that opportunity.
Well, the Brennan Center, which is a voting rights organization, says that research shows that at least 21 million voters lack ready access to their passport or their birth certificate. They say that roughly half of Americans don't even have a passport, and millions don't have a birth certificate. There's also married women who have changed their last names, who have names that are different from their passports or birth certificates. Do you know how this would impact a place like Wisconsin?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that bill to know the ins and outs. I don't want to give anybody the wrong information about how that would work with Wisconsin. All I know is what has happened here, which we have a voter ID law, but there's also provisions in that law, I believe they're required by federal court some time ago, that if you don't have an ID, is a way to get identification that you would need to cast a ballot. So there are some safeguards in there and how Wisconsin's works.
And is passage in the Senate appearing unlikely of the SAVE Act?
Well, assuming you maintain the filibuster, which requires 60 votes to move anything, it's not going to go anywhere. Democrats won't sign off. Now, you've seen Republican activists call on the Senate to abolish a filibuster, to go to what a filibuster was way back when, where you have to actually stand up and talk, keep the floor to prevent a vote. So we shall see if there's anything there. But if the rules stay as is, it's hard for people to see the Senate Democrats going along with this proposal and allow it to become law. Now, you could try to attach it to a must-pass spending bill, which is something I've seen people who support it throw out there. That could make things quite interesting. But again, there seems no indication that Democrats in the Senate are going to go along with this, at least not enough of them to allow it to become law.
Would the GOP-led state legislature be taking up any more election bills in Wisconsin in 2026, even though they might be dead on arrival with Democratic Governor Tony Evers?
There are a number of bills they've had public hearings on or tried to move, but the clear message from Evers has been he's not going to sign anything that would make it harder to vote in his mind, and so nothing yet they've talked about is likely to become law. There are some people who are watching to see if they would pass legislation that would allow clerks to begin processing absentee ballots early. The president has made a number of false claims about Wisconsin elections over the years and a quote-unquote vote dump in the middle of the night in 2020. Like, that's what happens in Wisconsin, in places like Milwaukee, when you have a surge of absentee voting that are counted, tallied at central count. If clerks, advocates say, could begin processing those ballots the day before an election, you would get, results much earlier in the night, which would take away some of that room for claims of fraud that are false. Republicans hold up Florida as this great place and how they do things. Florida allows processing ballots well ahead of the election. They have their results posted pretty shortly after their polls close at 8 o'clock, largely because those mail-in votes are tallied before election day, or at least processed. So, but again, in Wisconsin, it looks an uphill battle to get that bill passed as a standalone bill for the session ends. And that means if you have a close election come November in Wisconsin, you're going to see people decrying central crowds in Milwaukee and Green Bay and other places like that when they go into the late in the night because you have high turnout in Wisconsin, a lot of absentee ballots.
Moving to people being able to watch what's happening in the Wisconsin legislature, what's the latest on Wisconsin Eye? It's the state capitol broadcast network. It's independently run, and it shut down earlier this year because it couldn't find enough funding.
Yeah, the website is back up. It went live again on Monday of last week. They got $50,000 from the legislature. There's a body called the Joint Committee on Legislative Organization. It is made up of legislative leaders. They have the authority to appropriate some funds that are in the legislature's budget. They did the $50,000, $25,000 from each house. That allowed the network to get back on the air in February. That's going on as there is a bill moving its way through the legislature. We'll have a vote in the assembly that would take just short of $10 million. That's now set aside in state funds for matching grants from Wisconsin Eye, and instead put that in an endowment. That endowment would be invested, run by the State of Wisconsin Investment Board, and the interest off of that fund would then be used to fund operations. Now, if you were to invest it tomorrow, it'd take a while to generate those funds, right? So in the meantime, there's a question about how you'd fund Wisconsin Eye to keep it rolling. John Hankus is president of the network. He has said if the Senate gets on board with that bill and the governor, it would free up about $175,000 in private donations, and he thinks others would come behind it. The real issue is the Senate. In the Assembly, Speaker Robin Voss, a Republican, Greta Neubauer, the minority leader, a Democrat, they are co-sponsors of the bill. It passed out of committee unanimously last week. It's getting a floor vote this week. In the Senate, though, you have Republicans who really have some questions about Wisconsin Eye, how it's been run, its finances, its leadership. So there are some real hang-ups over there to get that bill done. And it's not clear there's a path to getting it done. Don't forget the Assembly is scheduled to adjourn by February 19th. The Senate's supposed to be until like March. But after that, legislative activity will die down quite a bit. So there's a thought among some members of the Senate, hey, they've got time. Now, Wisconsin has other programming, covers other things besides just legislative hearings, but there is really a possibility it goes dark again, and whatever it is isn't back up again until the next session in 2027. But we shall see. That's to be determined.
All right. Definitely something to keep track of. Thanks for the insights, JR, and thanks for joining me on Capitol Notes.
Anytime.
Just like Capitol Notes, Lake Effect is available as a podcast, so you can listen when you like. Find it wherever you get your podcasts, then subscribe, download, and listen on demand. Later in the show, we'll learn about a local World War II hero named Brownie. But first, we'll speak with a group of seniors who meet up for a monthly social club and what getting together means to them. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Wintertime can be a hard time for connection, especially for seniors. But Jane LeGolden might have cracked the code. 10 years ago, she started a meetup group for seniors. It's a happy hour once a month, meant for older adults to make friends and find community. WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez visited the group last week and shares this story.
Hi, everybody.
Jane, how are you? Hi, Marianne.
I didn't mean not to sign up again. I really did. Okay.
Yeah, so here we are at Open Flame Restaurant in the bar area, and the members from the 65 Plus Happy Hour right now are starting to congregate, and they check in at the table here to be able to get a name tag. And they also make a donation for us to help keep the organization going through Meetup. And then everybody gets their cocktail and has a good time.
Hey, you have a new date? I see that you're with a handsome young man called Jimmy.
Yes.
And what are you expecting from tonight?
Oh, I'm expecting to have a good time. Everybody here just comes in and really just enjoys seeing everybody and possibly making new friends and getting together.
If you could just introduce yourself and tell me how old you are.
I'm Margaret, and I'm 71.
I'm Mike, I'm 70.
Hi, I'm Vicki Firstino, and I'm very soon to turn 80. Yes.
Okay, my name is Sue, and I'm going to turn 80 in a couple months.
My name is Mark, and I'm 76 years old.
He's a baby. I'm a cougar. We met here. We met in spring, May of 2020, and both of our spouses passed away in November, and within 3 days of each other, actually, and both buried at the same cemetery, St. Adalbert's, in his area where he'd always walk and do walks around, and he happened to come to meet up that one Wednesday, and that's how we met.
10 years, incredible. What's been bringing you back all that time?
There's such an eclectic group of people from all different backgrounds, but we're all creaky. Some of us are 100 years old.
It took me quite a bit of nerve when I first came here, and I thought about coming, and I didn't, and another month went by, and finally I did one time. Some people come with a friend. I came alone, and then I found the people to be so warm, and then I found out kind of why. Jane runs it well, but they had a name tag that they identify you if you're new. And so all these people were talking to me, and they're being nice and saying, "Oh, are you new?" And I thought, well, how do they know?
Well, what brought me here was that I was a flight attendant for 31 years. So in that job, you lose a lot of local people because I was gone all the time, all over the world. And I loved it. I wouldn't trade it for anything. But a few years before I retired, so I've actually been coming here since I was in my 60s. But before I retired, I realized I need some friends. I need a life in Milwaukee.
What is something that you've gained from this group?
This time of year when you have seasonal affective disorder, which affects people our age more than I think anybody else. You just get that, I don't want to go anywhere, it's too cold, I'm too and you get the reminder every month, it's time for happy hours, get off your daddy. Go.
It's a challenge, it really sucks. Because well, just from the standpoint, I know many younger people who have aches and pains and this and that. Well, that just gets trumped up as you get older, but you can't be a sissy as you get older. You have to be tough. You do.
For me, it gave me hope, because at that time was a dark side of my life, and I finally found people that I could share it with and move on in life and still remember the past.
Aging is, I try not to think about it. I'm very fortunate. I have not had a lot of issues, but I know a lot of people at 80s I'm not going to get better. I know that. So whatever. But no, it's a hard place to be, but when you have a group like this, it makes it so much easier.
I was a flight attendant, but I'm very much an introvert, but nobody thinks that. So when I came in the door the first time, all I wanted to do was turn around and run. And I've heard many other people say that. It was like, this is too much. And at that time, there were only 40 or 50 people here. Now there's 70 to 100. But so bless the hearts of people that walk in the door now. They're brave. But I did see one person that I recognized, one person who's no longer with us, no longer with the group. And so I went over to her and I said, hi. And she didn't remember me. So I reintroduced myself. She kind of recalled me. And that one person helped me get through the first time I came.
Vicki is a tough broad. She's had cancer, breast surgery, and another cancer. And look at how beautiful she is.
What is a message that you have for other seniors or people that don't have groups or spaces like this?
I feel bad for people that stay home. I could easily do that. I've had a lot of illness since I retired. And you just have to pick yourself up by the bootstraps and walk out the door and gamble. Our lives are shorter when we're this age, so why not gamble and walk in the door and pray that somebody is going to be nice to you, and usually they are here, and you move on and you've got a whole new life. It's very sad to think of people staying home because there are opportunities here.
What I'm doing is I'm asking everyone to introduce themselves and to tell me how old they are.
Okay, I'm Jane LeGolden, and I'm 77, and I am the organizer of this group.
What was the impetus or what was the spirit that made you want to start the group?
10 years ago, because it is 10 years ago this March that I started this group, I realized that a lot of my friends were moving away. I mean, Arizona, Florida, up north, Illinois, and I'm going like, I need friends. And one day I said to my daughter, I think I'm going to start a meetup group. Quite honestly, I went home, I poured myself a glass of wine, I sat down at the computer, and I started this group. And what's written out there right now is what I wrote 10 years ago. And it was basically, I wanted to meet people, have friends, and be able to do things.
And you've done that for so many people. One of my questions is, what has this group given to you?
It's given me, I feel like it's given me my life. I mean, of feeling alive and not being alone, and always knowing that I have somebody there whenever I want somebody. It feels so good to meet these people, and I didn't want to do a group where I had to read a book, knit a blanket, make something. I just wanted to meet people, so thus the happy hour. And it certainly isn't because we come here for the drinking or anything like that. It's to meet the people.
And then can you talk to me about your own moment of you had to make a decision if you wanted to keep doing this or not?
Yes, I have. And I have sometimes thought about not doing it because of some of the work that's involved in it. But then I sat one day and I actually tried to imagine my life without the group, and it didn't seem like that was the right way to go at all. And I don't think I will ever give up this group.
How close did you come when you were sitting with that idea of like letting the group go?
It took me months to make that decision because you actually register every 6 months to continue with the group with the meetup organization. And so after I did the time, I took the next 6 months to actually reflect and talk to people and try and decide. And when people keep thanking me for having the group and for what I've done, and they're so appreciative, and they're just so happy to be able to get together, it's hard for me to look away from that and not to do it. And more than that is, like I said, I finally actually sat almost an entire day and reflected what my own life would be if I didn't have the group. And so maybe it's selfish that I kept it too.
That story was produced by WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez. We'll take one more break, then we'll learn about a Wisconsin pet turned World War II veteran and a children's book all about his life. That's next on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. During World War II, American families were asked to make a lot of sacrifices. Americans rationed everything from food and clothing to gas and firewood. Some families were even asked to donate their pets to the war effort for the Dogs for Defense program. The military deployed family pets to the front lines to help soldiers on the battlefield. That included a little dog named Brownie from King, Wisconsin. His life story is the subject of a children's book called Brownie the War Dog, written by Kelly Nelson. She joins me to talk about it. One of the most fascinating things about this book is this little-known program it discusses, where Americans were encouraged to enlist their pets. Can you tell us a bit about it?
I'd be glad to. So the Dogs for Defense program was very unique. It was a civilian-based program that was started by dog enthusiasts, and they started to think that maybe that there was a skill set with dogs, and especially in the obedience world and things that they thought might marry well with the military and what they could use the dogs for as far as war use. So it was a very unique time, and they really reached out to folks on the home front, including children. And this included them asking for family pets to be donated to service in the war. And there were regional recruiters. There was one in Milwaukee that we know of. And at that time, this was new. This was a new use for World War II. So they relied on recruiting the family pets.
Now, I was a bit familiar with the Army and the Navy using cats, for pest control and that kind of thing on ships and in storage facilities, but I was less aware of exactly what dogs were being enlisted to do. What were the kinds of jobs that a dog would perform during the war?
Sure. So there was a variety of tasks that they had really enlisted them for. Many were sentry dogs, which Brownie was a sentry dog, basically a guard dog, and it was guarding artillery. It was guarding the men. A handler was assigned, and that individual handler exclusively handled the war dog, and it was not a pet anymore. It was trained to be an attack dog, and even the other soldiers didn't get close. It was something that it was a tool, and it was a tool that was very much used for protection. Other dogs that were more like a husky and those kind of breeds, Malamutes, they were used for pulling sleds in different regions. Some dogs were used as messenger dogs to relay messages to soldiers. So a variety of uses. And they did have to have specific height requirements, weight requirements. These were not jobs that were suited for small dogs. They had to have some girth to them.
Do we know about how many dogs ended up serving in World War II for the U.S. Army?
The U.S. Military in general had asked for about 200,000. That was what their goal was. They wanted purebreds, but at that time in our country, there were not a lot of purebreds, and so they had to widen their net as far as reaching out to crossbreeds and things, shepherd mixes, Dobermans, but about 20,000 dogs were donated, with about 10,000 of those making the cut. Many of the dogs were afraid of noises, and that seemed to be the biggest problem, that the dogs were put in situations where they just shut down because of the noises. So they became very particular as far as who they approved to be in the War Dog program, and much of it was based, again, on the size, but also their ability to withstand the noises.
Sure. A lot of noise during war, I would imagine, and a lot of different requirements as far as temperament, as far as ability to do the job, as you say. What made a dog like Brownie a good candidate for the war?
I think really the trainability, the youth, they had to be young dogs, they had to be trainable. The main thing being that they had to be quiet. Even in if you follow any dog obedience, as you get into the upper ranks, a lot of the dog training is done with hand signals, and these dogs had to learn to be quiet. These dogs really had to learn to watch their handlers because everything was given with either hand signals or by body language, and they had to learn to be very quiet. So really, I think just the willingness and trainability was the main thing as far as the success of the dogs.
So for Brownie, what was that journey like from being a house pet into being on the front lines with all of the other soldiers?
Right. So he was sent from Wapaka, Wisconsin. He was sent to the Fort Robinson Dog Receiving and Training Center out in Nebraska. And that's where veterinarians, they did, they had an initial physical to make sure he passed physical requirements. And then that's when intense training started. And a big part of that was assigning a handler, having that handler be the exclusive person to feed him, groom him, train him. And it was a very intense training process that they needed to go through. And again, much of it being for the dog to learn to be quiet and really follow and watch his handler so that they were ready to be shipped over to the Pacific Theater in Brownie's case in order to do the job to keep his handler safe and his unit safe.
Now, once he was out there, what was Brownie doing?
So he was a sentry dog. So a variety of tasks. It was really to be a protector for his handler, for his unit. In any capacity, he was always being asked to sniff out the enemy, and these were in very, very intense circumstances. The Pacific Theater really refers to the islands. There was a lot of battling that was going on where they had to hop from island to island, and this also included the monsoon season in more of the spring and June time of the year, and Brownie was there for about a year and a half, so he would have withstood this where it just rained constantly. And these were jungles so just really awful conditions. Sometimes it was shoulder deep in water that the dogs had to wade through. So really, really miserable circumstances. But he did his job and he did it well.
Now, of course, World War II had many casualties, and I was surprised to learn that a little dog like Brownie was able to survive the war. He came back, but like many veterans, he had changed quite a bit. How did Brownie live out the rest of his days after the war?
Sure. So after the war, he did go through a demilitarization process. He went back to the Fort Robinson Training Center, and they basically civilianized these dogs so that they would be able to function within just regular civilian circumstances. He was sent back to his family. Families did have the option of bringing the dog home to them, and they had to accept them no matter what the circumstance was. But Brownie had a wonderful temperament. He switched right back. He made the transition back from a fierce fighting sentry dog to that of a family dog. And he began to follow Orrin, his young owner's mother, who was a cook at the home at the Wisconsin Veterans Home at King. She was a cook there. And he began to accompany her. He'd escort her to work every day. And then when she went in, then he'd make his rounds and visited all the veterans and really became quite beloved by the veterans and their families. And everyone was devastated when he was hit by a car and killed. But he did live out the remainder of his years really in service to man in just a different fashion. He served while he was overseas, and he served man when he came back. So I think when I learned of his story, I just thought it was the most endearing thing that this animal just really his whole life was in service to people.
For sure. Now, of course, this is a fairly serious topic, and the book is for kids. What do you hope kids get from reading this?
I hope that they have a real understanding of the sacrifices that were made on the home front during World War II from the families, from the children. I hope that they also had a real appreciation for this canine hero who is from Wisconsin, who is buried here 75 years ago. 2024 marks the 75th anniversary of his passing and military funeral. But it pleased me just so much that the Wisconsin Historical Society Press, who published this book, felt the same way that I did as far as that his story deserved to be preserved and shared in this fashion and in such a beautiful picture book format. So there are just so many things that I hope that children take away from this but mostly just to have that appreciation of the sacrifice that was made.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for joining us here on Lake Effect and sharing your work.
Thank you for having me.
Kelly Nelson is the author of Brownie the War Dog. We spoke in 2024. And that wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Joy Powers. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can always find our conversations at wuwm.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll hear concerns about the use of facial recognition technology by the Milwaukee Police Department and ICE, and best practices when using it. Thanks so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.